I saw the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, say something kind of wild, and I wanted to share it with you. So here it is. I'm sorry you have to look at Miller for a bit, but bear with me. It's not very long.
And the human rights that we are going to protect are not of the savages that torture and rape and murder. The human rights that we are going to protect are of the peaceable citizens who have an absolute human right to live in physical safety and security every day of their lives. And in that mission, I promise you, we will be your closest partner. Thank you.
Now, first observation is that human rights are by definition universal. They belong to everyone. They are human rights. And to say that some people receive human rights and to say that other people do not is to explicitly say that some people don't count as human and some people do. Now, in the case of Miller, given his ideological beliefs, his policy priorities, we have a pretty good sense of who he means when he talks about humans, but who he means when he talks about peaceable citizens, because even that phrasing there, right, creates a category, not all citizens, but peaceable citizens. So ideological opponents do not fall into the category of human for Stephen Miller. Certainly brown and black people don't appear to fall into the category of human for Stephen Miller. Large groups of Americans, large groups of people simply don't fall into the category whose rights are worth respecting. And again, if human rights are not universal, then they're not human rights. They're the rights of a select few. They're the rights of a privileged caste. And that's what Miller actually believes, right? That rights are a privilege of a select few, of those who have earned them by way of their behavior or to their belonging by favored groups, whether those groups are defined by race or nationality or religion or what have you. If you are outside that, then I think it's quite clear that Miller just does not think that you are entitled to rights or even the kind of due regard that we give to people who we view as our equals, even if we do not reside within the same polity. Now, I bring all this up not just because Miller is a genuinely loathsome individual, one of the worst people this country has ever produced, I'd say, but because it is further evidence, you might say, for a claim I've been making in my work on the page and these videos, and that is that the Trump administration isn't merely conservative or right-wing or reactionary or what have you, but it represents a distinct tradition in American political life, which is an outright rejection of the principles to the Declaration of Independence and the kind of universalist impulse of the American Revolution. One of the key tensions in American political life from the beginning is this divide between the starkly hierarchical and unequal society that the United States is and has always been, and the underlying principles of the American Revolution, which were universal. The Declaration, of course, describes inalienable rights that belong to all of mankind and that all people are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that the American revolutionaries themselves envisioned their revolution as something that would be a beacon for liberty across the entire world. They simultaneously were committed to their, again, quite hierarchical society, but also thought that this would be a nation that attracted all people who loved liberty. And this is the fundamental tension between universalistic and egalitarian aspirations and an illiberal and unequal reality. And one of the engines of American history has been those Americans who have wielded the aspirations of the country against its actual present state. I think you can think of the Civil War, in fact, as one of the grand ideological struggles of this country's history. The struggle over slavery was both the struggle over the material reality of the institution and also what it signified to the American nation. It's no accident that slaveholding radicals, ideological slaveholders, men like John C. Calhoun, for example, or George Fitzhugh, openly argued against the Declaration of Independence. Calhoun argued that Jefferson was simply wrong, that all men were not created equal. But Fitzhugh was even more radical, saying that societies are like beehives and that there are workers and that there are queens and everyone has their place, that there are some who must be in bondage, that there are some who sit outside the category of human and thus are not really entitled to rights like the rest of everyone else. This was the ideological basis of the slaveholding radicals that pursued the Civil War, that there was a caste who had rights and a caste who did not, and the latter would always sit beneath the former. Union victory in the Civil War did not make the United States an egalitarian society, but it held out the possibility that those ideals, that the ideals of the Declaration, would continue to be an important and driving force in shaping American society. You can look at the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments as attempts to instantiate those ideals into the Constitution itself, to make the Declaration fully part of the constitutional order. When you look at MAGA, when you look at the Trump administration, again and again, what you see are voices who sound much more like those slaveholding radicals than they do Lincoln, than they do Douglas, than they do any of the people who we hail from that period as our intellectual forefathers. They sound like those slaveholders who believe that human rights did not exist, that only some people were entitled to being Americans, that only some people really counted as fully human, and that the rest were there to be used and abused and discarded. So when I see Stephen Miller up there, I don't just see a representative of the administration. I see a representative of an intellectual tradition in this country that would discard the Declaration of Independence as having any controlling meaning over how our country is supposed to be constituted, who sees the United States as first and foremost and only a place for certain people of a certain background, of a certain race, and who would use the power of the state to enforce this. MAGA is not the Confederacy by any means, that would be silly to say, but I think that this administration is the closest this government's ever gotten to Confederate government. It's as if we have secession without actual seceding, an attempt to break the United States off from its best traditions and render it something lower, baser, and uglier than it could be.